We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To this famous Declaration of American Independence and hypocrisy, I can only say, bullshit. You see, in 1776, at a time when our country's forefathers penned and published these words, the African men and women that our ancestors had kidnapped, relocated, enslaved, and abused, well, they were certainly not considered equal, and they certainly had no rights. Their lives were held at the mercy of their captors. They had a definite lack of liberty and limited avenues of pursuing happiness. Likewise, could be said of the Native Americans who had been driven from their homelands to make space for white settlers who would cheat, corral, and eventually kill them, while forcing these indigenous peoples to accept foreign culture, lifestyle, and religion. Where were their unalienable rights? Throughout its trepidatious history, the United States has been notorious for depriving people of color their equal and indeed human rights, consequently excluding them from its promised pathways of opportunity and upward mobility. These historical blights both created and have sustained deep inequities that pervade across every aspect of life for entire groups of American people. These are consequences which remain entrenched in the systemic and institutional fabric of our nation, gushing wounds that have gone unattended and, worse yet, have been normalized and ignored. While much progress has been made, in many ways, toward equality for all people, such progress remains in its infancy, and it seems like each step forward reverberates with backlash. As noted by Jamar Tisby in his book, The Color of Compromise, racism never goes away. It just adapts. In response to the abolition of slavery, for instance, white mob violence and Jim Crow laws swept across the nation and remain ever-present artifacts of our modern society. The civil rights movement, well, that was met with drastic cuts in federal anti-poverty programs and the rapid acceleration of mass incarceration. And even the election of our first African-American president has been followed by damaging backlash through the curtailment in policies that enforce fair housing, reduce inequities in the criminal justice system, and protect consumers from predatory lenders. While these aggressive responses to progress have disproportionately affected people of color and the poor, the residual effects have impacted our entire society. As we often repeat here on Coup Save America, the most successful nations are those where every citizen is succeeding. But as always, the wealthy and powerful shudder at the very idea of equality, lest they somehow find themselves with less wealth and power due to the successes of others. When we hear the word racist, we tend to picture those in our society who make obvious their opinions about the groups of people they do not like. The head-shaven white supremacist flying a Confederate flag on from his truck, or your elderly aunt who makes family gatherings uncomfortable by spouting vile hate speech at every opportunity. This type of person, of course, well, they're a big part of the problem. But racism on a person-to-person level has caused horrific damage throughout our country's shameful history. However, while this kind of in-your-face bigotry is devastating to those who must suffer it, it's often the more subtle forms of discrimination that are working hardest to destroy our society. There are three basic types of racial discrimination: individual, institutional, and structural. At the most basic level, individual are the people who hold bias, prejudge, or make generalizations about others based on their race. These attitudes lead to oppression and sometimes illegal discrimination on an interpersonal level. For example, an owner of a small business might get nervous and overly vigilant when a young man of color enters the store, because he believes that those people are prone to shoplift. The next level of racism is institutional, when, whether intentional or not, policies, procedures, and practices within an organization work to the benefit of white people while being detrimental to people of color. To expand upon our first example, institutional racism occurs when a police department either blatantly or inadvertently trains its officers to believe that people of color are more likely to commit a crime. Such attitudes have led the police in New York City to stop and frisk black and Latino citizens at numbers grossly above their random detainment of whites, despite the very low percentage of criminal behavior and arrests that have resulted from such illegal stops. At a structural level, the cumulative effects of history, ideology, and culture, along with the interactions of different discriminating institutions, lead to a that's just the way it is attitude towards racist principles or practices, allowing such discriminations to become systemic throughout our society and leading to adverse outcomes and conditions for communities of color, and I would argue for society as a whole. For example, when a judge faces a person of color in their courtroom, they might draw upon the long-standing system of bias that is perpetuated throughout the criminal justice system for centuries, and give this person a harsher sentence based on ingrained racist beliefs. Now, while we are all the subject of faulty ideology regarding discriminatory practices, let's look at the 2021 Pew Research Center survey that asked participants to identify the greater problem, individual or structural racism against black citizens. 65% of U.S. adults felt that racism from individuals has a greater impact on black communities than racism in our country's laws and practices, while 23% thought the reverse. If you're wondering why these two numbers don't add up to 100%, it's because 10% of the survey respondents said there is no discrimination against black people in America. Go figure. In any case, the wider belief that individual racism is worse than structural comes as no shock, since media coverage focuses on the more visual and less corporately encouraged acts of individual racism. And people also have a tendency to reduce occurrences of systemic racism to an individual level, such as insisting that racism in law enforcement is due only to the behavior of, quote, a few bad apples, end quote, as we so often hear. Most activism campaigns focus on individual racism, but we need to place more emphasis on reform in the broader areas of institutional and structural racism, as black people would be the first to tell us. In response to the Pew Research Center survey, 52% of black respondents felt the U.S. laws were the biggest issue of racism, well above the 23% of overall opinions favoring individual racism. The fact is that when racist attitudes persist throughout our culture, institutions, and systems, it oppresses people of color in a multitude of ways that prevent entire communities from getting ahead in life and only serve to perpetuate the circumstances that lead to individual racist beliefs. There are many, 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 many areas of racial inequality within our society, and each of them deserves its own focus and exploratory monologue. But for now, I want to give just a brief overview. Let's begin with the racial disparities in education. From kindergarten through 12th grade, students of color have disproportionately less access to quality schools and teachers. The schools in their communities often have fewer resources and lack honors and college readiness programs. There is also evidence of systemic bias in teacher expectations when educating students of color. All of this, of course, leads to lower graduation rates and less likelihood of attending college. Moving onward, less educated citizens of color are less qualified for entering the job market. But it's only one of many, many racial inequities in the field of employment. Excuse me. In fact, improvements in rates of high school and college completion have had very little effect on equalizing employment outcomes. Workers of color are held back from obtaining financially viable jobs by hiring practices, public policies, limited opportunities, and lack of geographical mobility. Add to this the appalling wage disparities between white workers and workers of color, and that brings us to the most potentially damaging of racial inequities: economic inequality. At the end of 2022, the typical white employee made 25% more than a typical black employee, and 28% more than a typical Latino employee. Disparity in income is a large factor contributing to the overall racial wealth divide, where the median black family has only 12.7% of the wealth owned by the median white family. The median Latino family, however, holds 19.1% of a white family's wealth. And both black and Latino households are twice as likely as whites to have zero or negative wealth, meaning they have no assets or debt that exceeds the value of their assets. A person's economic status is a root cause of disparities in education, housing, healthcare, and social mobility, all of which are areas where serious inequity exists for people in communities of color. Furthermore, poverty and financial distress can easily lead to criminal behavior, a problem that only perpetuates the systemic racism and law enforcement practices that we touched upon earlier. There is compelling evidence that the incredible stress of belonging to a disenfranchised racial group can lead to chronic physical health problems, which is a topic, once again, worthy of a future monologue and certainly future attention on this show. David Grusky is a professor of sociology and the director of the Center on Poverty and Inequality at Stanford University. One of his organization's annual reports explains that the deck is stacked against people of Black, Hispanic, and Native American descent because of the likelihood of being born into an economically disadvantaged family and consequently receiving less education, growing up in a neighborhood with higher crime rates, and a plethora of other factors that can lead to lifelong social inequality. Grusky describes it as being an immediate 1-2 punch at the moment of birth. Grusky goes on to complain that a distinctly American commitment is that when the race begins, everyone should be lined up at the same starting place. This commitment is not being honored. We don't even come close to living up to what we claim matters to us. David Grusky, very white man and likely born into privilege, though he may be, is absolutely right in his wise words and sincere commitment to offering the American dream to everyone. Now, what can we do to facilitate change from Stanford University and every other institution that has become so steeped in the vial of systemic and structural racism? Well, dismantling racism in all of its many forms is obviously no easy task. Healthaffairs.org summarizes the problem well in this quote from their website. Quote, addressing systemic racism will require changing systems, laws, policies, and practices in ways that will be effective, endure long-term, and affect many people, instead of implementing piecemeal, time-limited programs that fail to produce sustained or fundamental change. It is far easier to mitigate the harmful effects of systemic racism while leaving in place the unfair systems and structures that produce those effects. Structures whose effects place people of color at disadvantage must be dismantled, end quote. We as citizens can help our country move forward toward this goal with advocacy, outreach, and by electing the types of officials who will prioritize and take on the challenge of reforming racist practices that are so well ingrained in our society. But all attempts toward progress do circle back around to the issue of individual racism. Examining and understanding our own biases, some we may not even realize that we have, is the first step to challenging the attitudes that can lead to sustainable progress in eliminating ingrained racism. And all of this begins with conversations like the one we'll be having on our show today. The website DoSomething.org provides an excellent tutorial on how to have conversations with friends and family about issues involving race, and the campaign page includes ample resources to help you understand the realities of racism and build comebacks to the common misconceptions and arguments that you will undoubtedly face during a conversation about racial issues. The campaign was created in the wake of recent protests against police brutality. So much of their information is, in fact, framed around the specific area of racism. But their guidelines for initiating constructive conversations, I think, will work for any racist issue. The authors at Do Something suggest that you prepare for a conversation about disrupting racism by first understanding why these types of discussions are important and helpful. Then asking yourself why having such a conversation is important to you personally. Next, you select someone who you know and trust to practice your skills on before tackling a person who you have no idea has racist opinions or what they might be. They also suggest that you establish goals for your talk and have realistic expectations of the conversation's outcome. And of course, make sure that you are well educated about the issues that you intend to discuss. This is a list of do's and don'ts to use as a guideline during your conversation about racism. And again, you can find these at dosomething.org. Do. Start the conversation from a place of curiosity and care. Try framing your question with sentences like, how might we? Or, I'd be curious to know. Do. Lead with I statements. Sharing your experience can help others understand their own experiences. Try something like, I've been feeling really overwhelmed by everything going on and at a loss for what to do. What is the news cycle bringing up for you? Avoid telling your conversation partner how they should feel about what's going on. If they say something that surprises you or makes you uncomfortable, try to work with them on understanding why they are thinking that way and provide context for a different point of view. Do. Ask open-ended questions. Try something like, how have you been feeling about what is going on in the news right now? What are some reactions you've had to protests happening across the country? Or how is the current news cycle making you think differently about your identity? Don't end the conversation at the first sign of discomfort. Expect for the conversation to be uncomfortable and prepare for disagreement. Think about the difference between going outside your comfort zone to the point where it moves towards learning and growth and going into a place of fear where you are no longer growing. Do talk about common misconceptions that might be associated with the specific issue of racism that you are discussing. Do stay on topic. Your conversation partner may try to deflect your questions by turning the conversation to different topics that take focus away from the root of the problem. Try and steer the conversation back to the crucial issue. Don't think you have to do this alone. Bring resources and research. And feel free to start by reading an article together or watching a video to reflect on during your conversation. Do consider taking a pause and returning to the conversation at a different time if you feel like the conversation is moving towards a more combative or towards conflict and is no longer being a productive one. There's a difference between a conversation that involves disagreement and discomfort and one that makes you feel unsafe, unheard, or does not feel like it's moving in a helpful direction. Not everyone is ready to have this conversation, but planting the idea is a great start. And that, folks, is what it's all about. Getting a start on truly changing America. We've had ample time to tackle the problem of racism, but only the most obvious steps have been taken. So many people think that racism can't possibly exist since schools are no longer officially segregated, and we can all contract COVID-19 from the same drinking fountains, but the subtle and systemic racism that stagnates in our social structures, institutions, and our very hearts is the poison that fuels the racial disparities that must be driven from a nation where everyone is promised human equality. And that, my friends, is the last word up front. On today's Coup Save America, I am going to be interviewing a guest who has been personally impacted by the fallout of the systemic racism that pervades our country. He is the author of two incredible books, Anatomy of a Hustle, Cable Comes to South Central Los Angeles, and What Did You Think Was Going to Happen? The Betrayal of South Central. And he is joining us today to discuss a little-known legal case that, frankly, ought to outrage our national conscience. Clinton Galloway joins us in just a few moments. First, I want to share some exciting news from a previous guest of Coup Save America. You may know him as Barry Nicolia, and he is already a #1 best-selling author. And today, February 7th, well, not today, on February 7th, he is launching a brand new book titled Move the Mountain, Intention Reset. And we have a copy of that book, I believe, we can put up there. During his appearance on our show, Barry talked about the concepts that he shares in his book about how our thoughts can impact our actions, and it sounds quite inspiring. Move the Mountain is available right now on Amazon.com, so give it a read and then email us any thoughts or questions that you'd like to share with Barry when he returns to the show for another conversation that I'm very much looking forward to. And with that, folks, we'll be right back with my very special guest, Clinton Galloway. And hopefully I will be able to talk better. We'll be right back, folks.
Understand economy,
And joining me right now is Mr. Galloway. Hello, Clinton. How are you doing?
Fine, Sean. How are you today?
I'm doing great. I have really been looking forward to talking to you. I read your book.
Thank you.
I have to say, it was really hard to get through. I was so enraged. And I think what's even more upsetting is how, as you say, this is a very little, known case, and yet
Right.
is one of incredible consequence. So, thank you for joining us. And I wanted to also say I just started reading your first book, Anatomy of a Hustle. I should have probably read that one first and then carried forth, but
They go back and forth, you
yeah,
know?
go. Why don't you go ahead and just start and sort of share the backstory a little bit about this?
Okay. Before cable television actually got into the marketplace in 1979, my brother went to the city of Los Angeles and wanted to build a cable television franchise in the South Central area, which was predominantly black. The city, in turn, turned around and divided the franchise so that all the black people in the city of Los Angeles would be in one franchise area. In doing that, we went forward and filed applications for all the areas that we had sought to build. We filed applications in other cities, Compton, England. We're trying to do a regional cable television system where none existed because we saw the importance of technology coming into
Right.
America. It was changing the world, but it would not change South Central, and it would not change most black communities because the governments themselves were denying the access to this system. We had to go to the United States Supreme Court to get any sort of guidance. And in 1986, the United States Supreme Court ruled unanimously in our favor that the city was violating our constitutional rights. We came back to a black federal judge in Los Angeles, Consuela Marshall, who simply held our case without trial for 6 years. We spent a total of 10 years before this judge and never got a trial, never had a single public hearing. And at the end of the battle, she said, "Hey, yeah, you're right. They've been violating your rights for 10 years. Here's $1.
Yeah,
So you get
that
a trial for your
is
rights."
what I find most. I mean, when we talk about systemic and institutional racism, I mean, and you put it so perfectly in your book, when your rights are not worth anything, you don't have any rights at all.
That's exactly it. Thank you.
And the dollar figure, like I said, it still outrages me. I mean, what rationale was even behind it? I mean, the insult of that figure to me is just unimaginable. I cannot believe that that's all that they awarded you as a
That's
dollar.
how we felt. We had the top economist in the United States regarding cable television come and do our damage calculation. He calculated our damages at over $100 million. The additional cost to build that system from 10 years of delay. In order to compete, we had to build a system. In order to build a system that cost $100 million more, we would have to charge twice what anyone else was charging, which made us not able to go into the marketplace. The other funny thing was in 1993, Congress passed a law that said if your civil rights had been violated in cable television, you could never collect damages. And this was led and pushed by Joe Biden, who was the US Senator pushing this legislation in 1993.
I
So when
like
you
to
have
call him
governments
Jim
telling
Crow Joe Biden.
yeah. So when you have governments telling you you can't have your rights and courts supporting them, but the most important thing was a district court telling a U.S. Supreme Court decision would not be used in this city. When a district court can override the Supreme Court, our system of justice must be called into question, and that's what I would do right now. I call into question how a district court, can override a Supreme Court, a unanimous verdict, not 5-4, a unanimous verdict, and deprive black people. Technology deprivation was one of the most damaging things that has happened to Black America in the last 50 years because it controlled everything:
Yep.
education, poverty, moral values. We could not give our children moral values because we didn't have the media. And I've seen another one of your shows where you talked about media and the
Yes.
importance and how it violated people's things. So these are issues that became so important, but delaying these issues for 10, 15, 20, when the internet became an issue. People said, well, black people can't get it because they can't afford computers. Well, that may be true, but cable television could bypass the need for computers. And in doing that, they didn't think it was important because it was only poor people who didn't have computers. So they didn't think it's because there was no competition, no one else could do it. And that's what the city set up. And again, when you talk about institutional racism, I think it's important that we make sure that people understand there are black leaders who are helping to support this. In our case, Tom Bradley was the mayor of the city of Los Angeles. And he worked hard to make sure black people did not get any involvement with cable television as an industry. So it's important that people understand institutional racism is not only a white black thing, but is also a black politician thing when they think they can get money out of you. And that's what it came down to. We didn't pay any bribes and they didn't want to do business with us.
Yep. Well, look at James Clyburn.
Exactly.
He went from being a civil rights activist to a corporate tool, really.
Yeah.
I mean, constantly betraying his own constituency and people of color. And, you know, you have to, I would like to think that if I were to enter politics, that would never happen. And I don't know what kind of spell gets put on these people, but it is quite disheartening when people that used to be civil rights leaders get into positions of power and fail to continue their advocacy and to pushing the needle forward.
And they call themselves civil rights leaders, but in
Right.
fact, they're not. They're civil rights pimps. They're pimping this off. In 1981, we spoke with Maxine Waters when she was still a member of the state assembly in California. She told us to our face and said, there's nothing I can do for you because I work for the Democratic Party. And that's fine. And she did not say that if you did something for me, I'd do something. She just made it clear to us, I'm not going to do anything for you because you are interfering with Tom Bradley, who we want to be governor here. And that was a big thing. In 1982, Bradley was running for governor, but he had made us mad at the same time. He had stole millions of dollars out of the community, refused to allow the community, and said, there are two black companies bidding who had applications. They denied each application and said, you cannot do business here. And so it came back one single company who happened to be a large contributor to Mayor Bradley's campaign, got a license, but never did anything. So South Central was denied technology for 10 years. You can never recover in a geometric progression over a 10-year period. When you're locked out at the beginning, you will never recover. And Black America can never recover the technology that it lost during that period of time. We couldn't develop programming. We couldn't develop skills. We couldn't provide moral values for our children to have as they went forward. And that's what part of what's destroying our communities.
Well, and even now, even in the mainstream media, black voices are seldom heard. And again, when they are, they're typically, as you say, these civil rights pimps that, you know, are more interested in sustaining the status quo and telling us all just to calm down.
Absolutely.
You know,
the thing that you see is people come on talking about what they do, and the media tells them these are civil rights leaders. If your civil rights leader is made by the media, who has been going against you for the last half century, then you've got a problem. And we dealt with Jesse Jackson back in the early 80s. Jesse did nothing. He ignored everything that went on. The power that came from cable television would lead into the internet. And the internet showed you what their power was when cable came along and said, hey, if you want broadband, you've got to use a cable television system. Again, it's a monopoly system run on public right-of-ways. Just as newspapers ran on public right-of-ways on the corners, public right-of-ways for technology were done on wires. And we were denied the access to wires in our own community. We weren't trying to do any other community. We went to the community that had no system. Nobody wanted to build it. No major company in the United States wanted to build it. We came up with all the money to build it. They said, you can't use investment bankers to raise your money. Who ever heard of such a thing in America? So we went and got the richest man in the world to back us. They told us you can't use the richest man in the world because we don't accept Arabs and red Chinese in this deal. So how can you raise money if you can't use the richest people in the world? You cannot use the standard investment system in the United States. And I knew because I was working in investment banking. That's how we got access to it.
Yeah, I mean, and talk about the delaying strategies too, because that's what I think is most remarkable. I mean, another right in this country, supposedly, is that you're entitled to a trial. You're entitled to a system of justice, and that is something else that you were denied.
We were denied clearly a trial because we were before the judge. In 1983, when we filed this case originally in the district court, we had been in cable television for 3 years and had fought with the city over this. So they delayed us and said, we'll delay you 3 years before we even tell you can't do it. We went to Justice Marshall. She dismissed our case without even a leave to amend. No hearing, no nothing. Just dropped dead. And now you got to spend $500,000 to go to the appellate process. We did it. They didn't think we could do it because they say, black guys don't have any money, but we came from investment banking. So we went through the appellate process, won unanimously at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, won unanimously at the U.S. Supreme Court, and came back to a judge who said, in 6 years, I cannot even get you a trial. This is a 10-year period of no trial, no public hearing. She never had a public hearing. Every hearing was held in her chambers with her friends. She was pushed to be a district judge by Tom Bradley, who we were fighting. And how did she get our case? I knew 2 weeks before we filed our case she was going to get it because people told me. That's supposed to be a random process. It's not a random process. It's a disgrace how the justice system works. And the pretense that it's fair and equitable for all people is a joke.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, and and I think people are, and this goes to the heart of why this issue is so important. The media, and now that technology has evolved and we've got cell phones that have cameras on them,
Yeah,
we're starting to see what people have long tried to ignore.
exactly.
And that's the power of the media, is the ability to wake people up and say, look, this is really going on. This is a problem. We have to address it. And this is what you were denied.
Absolutely. And the media decides what you will see. They decide,
Yes.
you talk about Tennessee and what went on there. Obviously, that's a terrible thing. That goes on every night in the United States, every single night. Some young black man is getting thrown around by policemen. And if he's not killed, then, well, it's just another cop thing. But the fact is, without technology, we can't educate the children to understand how to interface with police. They're afraid when as soon as you see a policeman stop you, you've got a problem. Whether it's a traffic stop, you got a bad light. It has nothing to do with you being a criminal. It has only to do with you being black and being stopped by police. And black policemen are just as bad as white policemen. Don't get anything. And I've known that for 30, 40 years.
Yep.
So,
it's a system.
It's a system. They work in the system. And Tom Bradley came from the police department. So to think he's going to be looking out for black people was a joke. And he wasn't an intelligent man. He was a bozo, to be perfectly honest. But the fact of technology deprivation hits everything. Education, poverty. When you have poverty, you have crime. Crime creates interface with policemen. You have that, your education level drops. When your education level drops, poverty must incense itself. So you can't do anything in a technology age when technology is divided and denied to the poorest people in the world. That's what happened in Black America. And it was done not only with white people, it was done with black people, especially black people in the United States, especially in Los Angeles. Everybody we dealt with was black, judges, mayors, councilmen. And we found they didn't care any more about Black America than anybody else did, even less, because they felt they were in power. And since they were black, no one would say anything about their racism. It is institutional racism. So when we started this, we have to remember, Rupert Murdoch was not even a citizen of the United States when we started this process to try to get technology into the United States. He became a citizen in 82. We were in it from 79. And they beat my brother down, and that's why I ended up getting called, because I was in investment banking. They talk about you need $50 million. Well, I've got investment bankers out of New York. But you can't use investment bankers. You can't use the richest man in the world. What can we use? It doesn't make sense, and didn't make sense, and it doesn't make sense now. It will never make sense, because you deprive the poorest people in the world of technology in an age of technology. And that is a travesty.
Well, it makes sense in the regards that it's about maintaining the status quo and keeping people oppressed.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And when you don't allow people to educate themselves, because that's what technology would do. People were afraid to walk the streets in South Central because the gangs were running wild, shooting children down, going to grade school. This is in 1981, 1982. It's not now. They're doing it now, but they were doing it even worse. So the ability to get education, to improve the education that was failing in the city of Los Angeles for black people, we had the ability. Technology offered that, and it offered that to everybody in the United States. And others were able to take advantage of it. Rich people were able to take advantage of it, but poor people weren't. And when you deny poor people the access to the technology, that is why it's called institutional racism. It's a government that does it. It's not just the individual. These individuals couldn't do it on their own. They had to have a government backing them. When the city of Los Angeles is the second largest city in the United States, backs a process to deprive 500,000 people of their rights, we've got a problem. And the problem is existing and will continue to exist because we can't correct it now.
Right. I was going to say, I mean, it's been settled. There's no more appeals process. No. I mean, going back to the dollar figure, just was there any rationale given behind? I mean, or was this just the judge saying, "Okay, finally, you won. You pissed me off. Here's all you get."
Basically, she was required to give us at least $1. When you win a civil rights case in the United States, you must receive damages. That is the minimum amount of damages she could give. It wasn't her choice. She had to give it. It was set by law. You have a minimum $1 figure. If it's, it's not a real case. She took it, the position was, you guys aren't for real because you're black. That was her position. She didn't care and she didn't know. She knew, but she didn't care. And she was working with the people in City Hall who had got her job as a federal judge. Jimmy Carter appointed her as a federal judge under the Democratic Party. So she took this position and said, hey, we will not allow you to do business. And if you give me $1 and tell me it costs $100 million more to build it, I can't build it. It's not possible. And again, the next year, this was 92. In 93, Congress passed a law that said, no matter what you did, no matter what the corruption is, we will not allow you to get damages from any city. In New York City, the mayor, the borough president of Queens killed himself over the corruption in cable television. So what they do, they gave a franchise in the borough of Queens to a borough president from Manhattan, Percy Sutton. Again, politics. Politics running media cannot work well. And you're not going to get an accurate media if politicians are running that media. And we see that's what's going on in the United States today. So we have this extreme points of views on either side of the fence, which no longer care about what's sensible or good for America. They care about their extremism. And when people, we need a third party. We need a third party because the extremism has become so violent, so dangerous, that it threatens our very nation and the fabric of our nation.
Yeah, I mean, that is the number one national security risk facing this nation.
I agree. I certainly do. And you made it quite clear. I'm glad for the things you put out and showed, like you talked about justice on one of your shows. And you made it quite clear how the system doesn't really work for everybody. It works for specific people. The rich guy gets, for example, Wells Fargo Bank. They stole trillions of dollars of people's money. And what they get, we'll fine you $3 billion, but you stole $50 billion.
And then they give them handouts too on top of it.
And no one says anything. Now Wells Fargo's on TV telling you how great they are to everybody. You saw 2 news articles about Wells Fargo stealing trillions of dollars from citizens, but nothing now. They've been doing this for decades, but no one. Well,
most people haven't even seen those 2 stories.
No, they haven't,
because they were not. Yeah, they weren't even highlighted really. They were just like, oh, here's here's an afterthought, And that again is the problem that you try to address with the media. You need to have media that you have access to.
Absolutely, absolutely. And when media is being bought by companies like Wells Fargo, they're not going to put that news article on more than once or twice. Okay. Now you put it on. You talk about things that go on in trouble. They stole from 3.5 million people. Stole, and they admit they stole it. But no one says anything now. They have nice little commercials. When you're paying the media, they're going to minimize what anything negative said about you. And that's what goes on. The companies that are doing wrong pay the media and get nice little things that are written about them. And that's where we are in America today. We've got a problem, a serious problem.
And
I'm glad you're addressing it. Thank you.
The other problem with me, well, no, thank you for coming on and thank you for writing the book. But this is such an important issue, the media. It drives everything. It dominates the social, economic, and political systems, really, that occur in our society.
It absolutely does. And without access to that, the average citizen doesn't know what's going on. And therefore, they listen to people talking about extremes, and they say, oh, this guy's on my side. That they're extremes. They're a bunch of lunatics on either side. I don't care which side you're on. If you're not talking about the centrist policies of America, what made America great, and that's fairness and equity. And we see that in so many people, but it's being blinded to people because they don't think there are people like that anymore. And there are. That most of the people are like that. And we have to get by this thing of allowing extremism to point our views. And media can do that, but we can't access media unless we have the ability to utilize the systems that exist in the United States. We were denied technology in Black America because they refused to allow us to use the polls. And the public right of way is a public right of way. The court made it quite clear. If you have a public right of way and you're allowing one company on, you must allow at least 2 companies, or it is a violation of the Constitution of the United States. So my rights have been violated since 1986. Do you think I'm going to go out and play with policemen about talking about my rights? Hell no. I know what your rights are. You don't really have rights until they give them to you. If you allowed rights, that's fine. But if you think I'm going to claim rights talking to a policeman, it's not going to happen.
I like to say you only have as much rights as the person that you're dealing with is willing to give you.
Exactly. When you see the government of a major city is willing to take the rights of an entire Black population in that city, and they're Black leaders. This is the thing. Tom Bradley was a Black leader. He claimed to be a Black leader. He wanted to be governor, so he eliminated any concern or benefit for Black people. He thought he owned them anyway. He was Black. But it turned out he didn't get to be governor because nobody really trusted him. So he ended up losing by a little bit. And I got to tell you, I was really pleased to see him have to acknowledge his loss when it came about because he's a prick. Sorry, excuse me.
No, hey, go, and the other thing, and this is where I get into so many arguments with my friends and people that I deal with, is this perception that r- these racist policies are Republicans, right?
No, it's not.
And and I find that ironic when we have Jim Crow Joe Biden, which I
Yeah,
cannot stand. I cannot stand that man.
neither.
He is a racist.
He's been a racist for decades.
Yeah.
He passed the 94 crime bill, which was basically
Yep.
let's lock up all the black people bill. Whatever you did, you got 20 years. You stole a piece of candy, 20 years, crime, gangs, we'll throw it all in together and merge it off. So you get 20 years. Yet Jeffrey Dahmer would have been eligible for parole after 15 years. He eats people for lunch, and he's eligible for parole. But a guy who's been selling pot, he's not eligible for parole.
Yep.
There's
Yeah.
got to be a change.
And that's just one example of Joe Biden's
Exactly.
racism. But see, therein again is the problem, and it does cultivate, circle back rather to the media, and that is the Democratic Party is just as racist as the Republicans. The difference is they do it with a smile.
They do it and pretend that they're doing something for you, but they've been as racist as anybody for the last 45 years. I've been at it for 40 years. I've seen what they do, and I've watched the crimes that they create against people by telling them we're going to
Hmm.
help. You're not helping anybody. You're not doing anything for anybody. What you're doing is looking out for you and trying to figure out how you can get your people elected. And if it means selling people down the drain, you don't mind that too much because it's only black people, it's only poor people, it's only Latin
Yep.
people. It's always someone other than you. And then when that happens, we can no longer trust it. Technology had a continued, complete redistribution of wealth in the United States. Who didn't participate? Minorities and low-income people. Minorities were locked out. So we were locked out at the very beginning from having the redistribution of wealth. Apple Computers made what, 12, 14,000 millionaires? A single company with technology. That's what allowed people to get rich. Cable offered that same benefit in the 1980s when we were available. There was no internet. There was no internet. There was cable television. We tried to bring our people in and bring the money in to do it. We knew we had to have the money, and that's what they were pissed off about. How did these guys get the money? How do black guys get the money? Because I was working in investment banking. That was my job. So I had access to investment bankers where you didn't. You were busy trying to hustle up $10 and $15 for your little gubernatorial campaign. So that's all well and good, but when you deny access to the technology and you take my skills and say, your skills are worthless. I'm a CPA. My skills are worthless. I'm in investment banking. Your skills are worthless. If we can't access the traditional methods of financing things in America, then we cannot participate in the systems that work for America. And that's what we have been
Absolutely.
denied. The Democratic Party has been key in this process because when it comes to black people, most cities where major black people populations live are controlled by the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
Let's make no mistake about it. So any failure in that government is controlled by the Democratic Party. And they've been doing it for decades. I can tell you, I take it back to 1980 because I was there. I'm not talking about what I heard or what somebody showed me. I was there
Right.
on the floor of the council and had people tell me. I had guys call me niggas in City Hall. I was called a nigger in Tom Bradley's office in front of him, and no one said a word. What are you going to do? You do the best you can do. We fought our battle for 13 years, spent several $1 million of not only my money, but other people's money. It was a lot of money to do. The city spent $10 million to stop us. Who stops black people? You need $10 million? Why don't you just get a cop to come and hit me in the head? They made it quite clear. But I mean,
Yeah.
to be perfectly honest, when I first got into this, we went to the FBI and told them what was going on. They told me to move out of the city of Los Angeles. Otherwise, a cop would show up at my door one night and I have a bunch of drugs and guns in my house. And I had to leave the city of Los Angeles. So I moved to an area that was outside of the city. Just because the FBI told me in their office, it wasn't a city. Now, when they tell you to move, you move, I tell you.
I can imagine. Yes. And they were sort of not being adversarial necessarily. They were just warning you that the level of corruption that you're dealing with.
Yeah. The level of corruption, the people you're dealing with are basically dangerous people. You may think they're only politicians, but some of the people behind them are dangerous
Right.
people. So you have to be aware of that. And I think I take my awareness about criminal behavior from the FBI before I take it from the city of Los Angeles. Because they've shown you what they'll do. They showed you in 92, we'll beat black people like nothing. They beat Rodney King. This is in 92 after they tell us we can't talk to our own people. I cannot talk to my people. I can't give moral values to the children in my own community. That's what it was. We needed to give moral values and show them that yes, you can do things. If I can do it, anybody can do it. I came from Jamaica, Queens. So I know how tough it can be. But my father didn't have an education or a lot of money, but he made sure we had education because he made
Right.
sure we went to school and worked hard at getting up a free public education. People don't see that anymore. They want their kids to be out of school, and
Yeah.
it's too bad.
Well, and like I said in the monologue, I mean, and this is what people don't get is I mean, the education system in this country is horrid.
That's a joke.
It's absolutely a joke. But when it comes to communities of color, I mean, it's criminal. I mean, it's another
It
civil
really
rights
is.
violation,
It really
and
is.
it's not just about teachers. It's about the funding that goes into these communities.
It's about the funding, and it's about making sure that children have the ability to get a decent
Right.
education. You know, if they're missing certain things, cable television offered the opportunity to give a substitute and to to give a little additional education to the people where the education system was failing them. So when you see that, you want to come in and say, okay, let me give you some supplemental education. The city's not doing a good job, but we know that. But at the same time, let me come in and do something using cable television where everybody else in the country was using it for education. We could not use it because they would not allow it to come into South Central for 10 years. You deprived people of education for a decade, and it was dangerous. Kids were afraid to go to school. How are you going to feel good about going to school when, in fact, you're getting shot at half the time? You can't.
Yep.
You can't educate the children. And when you have bad children in the class, two children who have mental problems, PTSD is flagrant in minority communities. No one wants to address the issue, and they pretend it's not going on. They see the same thing that guys in Iraq see. Guys getting gunned down on the street, except these guys aren't even armed. They're getting gunned down by machine guns, military weapons, and no one says a thing. Oh, 4 kids got gunned. All right, we'll just leave that and make it a problem. Well, kids got gunned down. It's another Thursday in South Central. So these are the issues that become a problem, and we can't address the problem using the tools that are available to all of us. The public right of way was a tool available to every citizen in the United States, according to the United States Supreme Court. When they denied us access, they said, you're not the same people who can access and benefit from Supreme Court rulings. So if you can deny the Supreme Court's judgment in South Central, then in fact, there are no laws in South Central. And what you see is no laws. Children are running wild. Machine guns are everywhere. Kids are driving down the street with machine guns on their laps. Come on, you can't have that. You cannot educate a people, and you cannot develop an economic order in a system where there's massive murder. Basically, you have people with guns going up and down the street. You can't build businesses in this kind of community. It won't happen because people are afraid of it. And that's a problem.
Yeah, I want, when I keep going back to the dollar amount, because to me that says everything that you need to know. I mean, again, as you said, if your rights don't matter, if they don't amount to anything, then you don't have them in the first place. And that's just, I wanted, when I read that, I wanted to say, well, I hope he sues the judge. I hope that there's something else, right? A next step, and there isn't. And
there's nothing else you can do. When you get a Supreme Court ruling and a judge refuses to comply with it, then that judge is breaking the law. When a city refuses to comply with the federal law, what you have is tyranny. That's the definition of tyranny.
Tyranny.
Governments that refuse to comply with the law. It's the very definition of it. People think that tyranny is some unusual thing. It's not unusual. Government can refuse to comply with the Supreme Court. It's a tyrannical government. The city of Los Angeles is one of the most racist and corrupt. Not only racist, but corruption runs rampant in the city. 3 of the 15 councilmen have either been indicted or convicted of crimes in the last 2 years. So when 20% of your body is convicted, there's another 20% doing it and not getting caught.
Oh,
so
right.
We have a basically corrupt system that is basically racist by its very definition. As you see it, they showed their racism in '92. They show it now, and they're even talking about it now. As Latin people have talked about how they feel about Black people. So we see it continuously. And Black people have never been able to improve because the people leading us are not leading us anywhere productive. They're leading us down the train. They're pimping out Black America. And that's what politicians are doing. And I want to make no mistake about what I think. You're just basically pimping. So you're no different than any other pimp to me, except you do it using the government's money. Other pimps at least have the integrity to go and get their own girls. You're using the public. I think more of pimps than I think of politicians. So,
Yeah, well, somehow I felt, and again, this goes back to the media, for quite a while, most of my life, I thought that the Democratic Party was the champions of social justice. I thought that they were the champions of civil rights. And I think what was most disappointing for me was Barack Obama. You know, I thought he was going to. I mean, I thought it was just. I was so excited, and being a white person, part of what I wanted with a black president was I wanted him to address racism at the institutional level.
Right.
I wanted actual reform. That was, it wasn't to me just about okay, we made history. It was like, okay, we've elected somebody who, we've crossed that threshold where we've said a black person is electable. Now let's take that, I don't even know what to call it, but currency. It was a currency that we had, a check. I thought that we needed cash. We need to take this all the way and do something, and nothing really happened.
Nothing happened because the party controls the president. The president is dictated to by the party and what they want to do. The party comes along and says, well, we don't want to seem like we're helping black people or we're helping progressive people or we're doing anything, that the conservatives are going to be upset about. So we'll do very little. And as long as you sit there and be black and don't get into any major problems, you'll be okay. But nothing productive is being done. And when nothing productive is being done by the government, things will continue to deteriorate. They cannot just stay status quo. Nothing stays the same as time changes. It either grows or deteriorates. In Black America, it's been a constant process of deterioration under the Democratic Party because they've allowed it. They agreed that it could happen. They accepted that it would happen, and they are allowing it to happen. And again, people talk about white people doing this to black people, but let's look at first. It's still institutional racism when black people do it to black people. You represent a government. You couldn't do this on your own. Obviously, you came into me and told me you wanted to take my company on your own. You'd have a serious problem, okay? But when you're a government, I can't do anything against the government except go to a court. When a court rules in your favor and tells you you are right, unanimously. This is not something where it was a decision. It was unanimous. And a judge simply tells you your rights are worthless. And that's what a black federal judge told me. The rights of myself and the 500,000 people in South Central were worth nothing. $1 is nothing. And so what are you going to do? Do you really think you've got other rights? What are the rights? This is the First Amendment. If the First Amendment is not valid, all the other amendments must be subject to being a problem. Because if you can't speak about it, you can't get it. And that's what the First Amendment makes it so important for.
Well, as I said in my monologue too, the hypocrisy of this country to me is just so blatant and so offensive. Yeah. The idea that our founding fathers, all men are created equal. Not really. You don't see an asterisk in the Constitution, right? But there is one. There's a huge one, and we've never come to terms with the racist past of this country. We've just ignored it, swept it under the rug, and in many ways, I think that the civil rights movement, for all the progress that was made, we've seen a lot of, regression on that front, unfortunately. But to me, that was almost a bad thing in the sense that it seemed as though when that era ended, we were like, okay, well, we've solved that problem.
Right.
No more.
Let's just let it go. We've done it. We finished it. Let it go now, It's not a problem anymore because we've done this. We've created equal education. But, when you had education in 1954, it was about having a integrated school system. In 1986, It was about having technology available. And when you denied that technology, you denied the ability of a people to educate themselves. And I call that an atrocity. Because without the ability to educate yourselves, and with a city and government that are failing you in education, you cannot get an educational level that would allow you to improve your community, develop jobs. Again, we were trying to bring 7,000 jobs into an area that had a 30% unemployment rate. Invest $50 million. It would have been the largest non-real estate investment in the community at that time. But they wouldn't let us do it, only because we wouldn't pay the bribes they wanted. And that was all it was about. They didn't care about cable. They cared about the bribes. And they wanted big bribes. So it was like, dude, I can't pay you big bribes here because we don't have any money. And we're not going to pay you anyway because I'm not going to jail over you. And you're not bright people. So somebody's going to end up in jail if this goes off. And it's not going to be me or my brother. So, and that's what you have to face and say to yourself, am I willing? And again, we were offered downtown pieces of real estate to walk away. They offered us 2 pieces of real estate in downtown, which were worth $5 million. I wasn't taking it because our commitment was to the people of South Central, to our people who are trying to improve themselves and thinking my education can help improve people, can bring moral values, can bring economic development to a community that is so in need of economic development. When you bring that economic development, crime must reduce because so many people are working, they don't have time to be committing crime. When you've got an unemployment rate of 30%, you got a lot of people with time on their hands. Time creates crime, and poverty creates crime. Education and lack of it
Yes.
are tied directly to crime. The lower the education rate, the higher the crime level. The lower the education rate, the higher the poverty level. They all go together. And when you deny one part of it, you can't say you expect something different to happen than did happen, because it's what will happen. What did you think was going to happen? That's where the book title came from.
Right.
What did you think was going to happen? Just what happened, because it couldn't happen any other way when you deny the rights and take away the ability of people to participate in all the other systems that go on in the United States.
Well, and some people may say, well, okay, you were denied a cable, television station. You actually, in your book, tied that atrocity to the problems that are rampant in South Central right now today.
Absolutely. They all are tied to technology, because we see what technology developed. Education came and improved with technology. Without the education, you can't get out of poverty. Without getting out of
Right.
poverty, the crime rate must remain high, because poverty and crime are tied directly. Higher poverty, higher crime. So when you do that, we can't create moral values. We can't create economic development and jobs in our own community. We weren't asking to come to your community. We said we want to do this, no one else wanted it. No one else wanted it. We came because no one else wanted it, and we had the ability to do it. We didn't know it was going to make a bunch of money, to be perfectly honest. We thought this would be cute and come in. We had people who we knew in Hollywood who were developing programming, but they couldn't get new programming on because there was no distribution outlet for Black programming. So when we came to do that, I was in investment banking. I knew plenty of people in the entertainment industry, plenty of people who were actors and directors and producers, and I still represent some of them in a business management perspective. But they had the ability to do this. I'm an accountant. I don't create programming. I create systems that allow people to bring programming to the market. That's what we do. And when you deny the ability of people to program for their own community, how do anyone else know what goes on in South Central if they're not from South Central? How will they know what Black people need if they're living in Beverly Hills or in Bel Air, like the people who got the franchise? Eli Broad, who owned Corcoran Road, he got the franchise. They never built it. They were allowed to sell it to someone else 5 years after they got it. They never built a single thing. Again, technology denied means you can never accomplish what everyone else has accomplished with it.
Yeah, I mean, and again, just the examples that you use in the book and that you tie directly to this whole case, this whole deprivation of technology, and I knew a lot of technology deprivation. So some friends of mine actually have it's called the Revolutionary Blackout Network, and it's are you familiar with them at all?
No, I'm not. I'm glad you told me, because I will become familiar with them.
It's Revolutionary Blackout Network. They're on Substack and YouTube. They have shows. Sabby Sabs is one of the shows, and it's a news program that features Black journalists. And they started it because, and some of the stories of these people that form this network and are on the network are just tragic, and it goes to the racism that exists in the media. They've lost jobs over it, merely by being Black and trying to get out a message. And so they started their own media company, and they're doing quite well, which again shows you that there's a market for that. And even still, and this is another problem, in the era of YouTube and Facebook and all these other things, these Black voices are still being censored and are face algorithms that work against them.
There's the key: the algorithms that work against them, because that's how they do and divide up things, and how you get access to certain specific people they want you to see, because they move the algorithm.
Yep.
And there's nothing you can do about the algorithm. You have to know these people exist. I didn't know they existed. I follow media all the time. I didn't know they existed. So now that I know, I can follow them. But if you can't advertise what you've got, you can't get the exposure. And you can't advertise without money or without the media that exists taking you in to do certain things. So we see that the gamblers now, they have big time access to the media. They're hooking children for gambling. And to me, they're a little different than the drug pushers. Drug pushers said, I'll give you some free heroin. These guys say, put up $5. I'll give you $1,000 to bet with. $5. Just let me on your phone. Once they get on your phone, you're dead.
Yep.
Okay. And that's what they're doing. They're hooking children into gambling. And the leagues, professional sports leagues, are encouraging this behavior.
Oh, yeah.
They get extra money. It's not bad enough they're multi-billionaires. They want more money. Your $50 billion isn't enough when you bought this team. You paid $5 billion. Now you need to get the kids to gamble. And of course, the gamblers are always going to lose. The house always wins. I've ordered it. I've ordered at casinos and I've ordered at gambling institutions. They always win. The numbers are designed for them to win. The only place I've seen a casino lose was when Donald Trump had one. I don't know how you lose at a casino. It's not easy. I mean, but honestly, it's not easy to lose money in a casino. The numbers are set for you to win. Everything. Don't even mention roulette. You may as well just throw your money in the garbage. So these things are part of the problem that I see. And I see the problems are not being solved because we're not allowed access to doing things. We've been locked out since 92. What can I do? I've had brain surgery since then. And again, most issues don't seem important after you've had brain surgery. Let me just be honest. All these issues seem less important than they did when I first started. Because after brain surgery in a few weeks in the neurosurgery, you're like, okay, well, I see the important things for me to get out of here and get on with my life.
Yeah.
So you do the battle as best you can. That's why I wrote the books. My brother passed in 2008. He told me to write the book. That was what I committed to him on his deathbed. So I did. And
your book was in the top 100 of, I lost my notes here.
Reviews. It was one of the top 100 books in 2012 because they understood how important it was. But of course, black people never understood. Where was the NAACP when the Supreme Court ruled about civil rights in South Central? They never said a single word. So they're not valid. They're not a valid civil rights organization. They're fronting for the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party is not doing anything. So if civil rights organizations don't speak out when the Supreme Court deals with civil rights in a black community about a black company, then you're not valid. You're not really realistic. It's a joke. And that's what NAACP and the Urban League are playing on black America. And a lot of black America realizes that now. So they put on big shows. We've got the NAACP awards, where you give out all the awards to people who are already rich. That's all great. But how does that help the average person on the street who can't get their kids in school, who can't get a job, who doesn't have the money to afford a house? Affordable housing is deadly. And it comes back again. If we don't make affordable housing a key issue in our lives and in the development of this country, we're going to see homeless people around the country all over. And when you look at homeless people, you see a dramatic percentage are black because of poverty, education, and crime.
Well, Los Angeles is a perfect example right now.
Exactly. Just look down the street. You can see them. They're laying on the street. 75% of the people on the streets are black. Another 10% 15% may be Hispanic, but not as many Hispanics under the conditions. And again, because Hispanics came from a country where they had skills, they had jobs, they learned trades, they could come here and use those trades. Black people in America have never been allowed to work and develop trades and skills. That's what we wanted to do using technology. That's the purpose of technology. Instead of sending our call-out jobs to India, we could educate people here if we had access to the technology to educate them on what we needed. But they wouldn't allow it. And now they talk about, and stop telling about white people being racist. All the people who supported us were basically white investment bankers, white, rich people, the people who came to do the technical work to make sure the system could work. Black people didn't give us anything. They wouldn't do anything for their own community because we wouldn't pay the bribes that went with doing politics in LA. LA is a corrupt city. It's been that way since 1980, and it's still corrupt. You can see it in the news every day. Yeah. And the racism is just rampant. Olivia Spencer says LA is one of the most racist cities she's ever been in.
How much of it too with the people in positions of power that are black? How much of that is sort of the residual of racism, where they're afraid to because they're in the clique, right? They're in the establishment, and that's not typical for people of color. And so, how much of it is just fear too? This systemic racism.
Part of it is they preserve their jobs by not allowing black people to benefit from the system.
Right.
And I go back again to Maxine Waters. She's been in office, 45, 47 years? What has improved in South Central and all the time of her being in office? Not a single thing. Crime runs rampant. Education is poor. Poverty runs rampant. The moral values of our children is terrible because we cannot give those moral values. What has she done? She talks about great things about what goes on internationally, but you represent South Central Los Angeles. And what have you done? She has not done a single thing. And most of the black politicians, people like Tom Bradley, stayed in office for 20 years. What improved in South Central when Tom Bradley was mayor? Nothing. We had riots. We had police brutality. Nothing improved because he didn't care. He was owned by the party, and he was not smart enough to do anything on his own. You know, and I don't mean to crack on him now that he's passed, but I cracked on him before he died. So, you know, it wasn't a secret. He was not a bright man. And to put that sort of person in power is a waste.
Maxine Waters recently was at there was a bunch of homeless people fighting for affordable housing, and they showed up at an event, and she happened to be there. And again, I want to just remind people these are homeless people. She literally told them, go home. The office here is closed.
That's Maxine. You're homeless. Go home.
Go home.
What does that say about a person who's so insensitive to people who are suffering when you have the power to do something about it? That's the type of person she is. And the people are suffering. People are suffering all day. Education, poverty, homelessness. You can't, to try to build in the city of Los Angeles, you need a collection of lawyers to even build a duplex here. So, you know, they don't want you to build. They claim, now the state has passed laws that will allow you to build, but only the state passed them. The city did not pass them. They still fight them. So it's hard to bring affordable housing. And again, when you want to build affordable housing, you need several $1 million to build 4 units of affordable housing. And I know because we're building affordable housing. And it costs several $1 million to build 4 units. So when you do that and you see, I don't want help from the government. I don't want anything from the government except to leave me alone. I don't, whatever your rules are, we'll comply with them. But I have no I don't want your money. I don't want you to pass any laws that benefit me. Don't help me at all. Because the more you help me, the worse it gets for my people.
Yeah. And, you know, I want to just go back to the idea that the Democratic Party, I think that the Democratic Party is far more dangerous than the Republican Party, mainly because of the false perception that people have. I mean, Democrats do a good job of pretending we're going to, fight for you. We're going to do all of these great things. I mean, they're very performative. The kente cloth, George Floyd, we'll put it. I mean, how about you pass a law that actually addresses police brutality, actual reform? You talk about defund the police or anything like that, they're like, oh, no. But they'll put it on kente cloth and put on, I mean, I almost vomited when I saw that. I was so outraged.
Well, look at the mayors of the cities where there's dramatic crime and dramatic mistreatment of black people by police. They're black mayors. Look at Memphis.
Lori Lightfoot, for instance.
Look at Chicago. Look at New York. Yep. You got 3 major cities with 3 black mayors, and what's improving in them? Nothing. Not for black people. They're building new housing for rich people, but nothing is improving for black people because they put these fronts up, and that's all they are is fronts. They don't control it. They're fronts for the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party says they basically assumed over the left. And again, when I was being raised, we thought the Democratic Party was it. It was only when I got into the office of City Hall and went into the mayor's office, I realized the blatant racism and the blatant stupidity that they're showing and the inconsideration for the entire race of people they are supposed to be helping. I mean, it's one thing to do nothing. It's another thing to turn around and do everything against them that you can do. And that's what I see. Politicians, especially black politicians, are doing everything. And they're all coming out of the Democratic Party. So I'm not worried about Republicans because you're the guys who run our neighborhoods. I'm worried about you. And you're doing nothing except destroying the people in the neighborhoods that need help. It's a tragedy and it's atrocity. And so
you look at Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, when she was, the Attorney General. Yeah, she's a prosecutor who actually said she defied the Supreme Court herself when they said, you have to let these people out of prison. And she's like, no, we want them. And she literally admitted that she wanted them for the free labor, the fire, because they were fighting forest fires, prisoners.
And she did everything she could to keep black people locked up. And she gave extremely long sentences and sought long sentences for black people who had committed a crime. And I don't have anything about going to prison, but you give a person who does something minor and they end up getting 20 years, and a person who kills somebody, you got 5 years, and don't let us catch you doing this again. Come on, you got to have a balance here. And to mistreat people and say, people can come back from prison and make a good life if you let them out in the first 20 years. But 20 years in prison, you're going to have a hard time coming back to reality because prison is hell. It's hell on earth. And that's what everybody tells me who's been there. I made it my life not to get there.
Well, and Democratic Party has done everything they can to funnel people into prison, especially people of color. I mean, again, Joe Biden's crime bill. We like to think that slavery ended. No. We moved slavery from the plantation to the prisons.
Yeah, and that's where they get them from. You go to some of these southern places, they take people out of prisons and make them work for somebody who's paying them to do it. It's slavery.
Yep.
It's a new form of slavery, and it's slavery nonetheless. Especially when you talk about private prisons. If a prison is controlled by the government, in fact, it is a slavery outlet. If you take a person out of a private prison and you don't have the same rights even a prisoner in federal prison has, in private prisons you have no rights. They can decide, we'll hold you an extra year or two because we didn't like your behavior. This is slavery. Yep. And when they make you work and they keep you locked up for an indefinite amount of time, what is it but slavery? And that people don't want to realize. Private prisons are a form of slavery, and they are being supported and promoted by governments because they say, we want to lock you up, but we don't want to pay the price to lock you up. If you want to lock them up, then put up a prison. But if you've got private prisons, guys who are saying, I want to make money off these prisoners, you don't feed them as much, you get them out there working, they don't have the same ability to get education. All these things are impacting the people who end up in prison and in jail and in the judicial system. So it's not an equitable system. It's not a fair system. It's a system that benefits those who control the power. And when you see, it's all rich people who control private prisons. There's no one single prison. Corrections System of America. They control what? 82 prisons in various states. They're housing over 100,000 people. But basically, they're slaves. They will do what they say. Their guards can treat them any way they choose, and they will work when they're told to work for nothing. So, what is that but slavery?
Yep, and their sentences are often increased for minor things that they do while they're in prison, which is again designed to keep them in prison indefinitely.
Right, and it's one thing when you have a government that says, I'm going to give you an extra time, but private prisons are able to say, you came here for a 5-year sentence, but you did something, I'm going to give you another year. Where do they get off? You're not the government. Government sentence people to jail. But when you put them into a private prison, you allow the prison to take over the entire judicial benefits that go with anyone being an American citizen. And when you don't get those benefits and you're locked up in a place where you are treated as less than a slave, actually, they feed you what they want. They don't give you medical care. They make you work in inclement weather. All the things that you wouldn't allow people to do if they were not in prison. But they are in prison, and private prisons run the system now. And that's why the people who come up and say, hey, let's build more prisons, they're talking about private prisons. Let's make more prisons for our friends, because the prisons they bring in, they say, we guarantee you 100% occupancy of your prison.
Right.
You can't do that with a hotel, but you can guarantee 100% occupancy. And they're charging $30,000, $40,000 a year for these people. So they're making tons of money. They're making tons of money off slavery. And that's what it is. I'm glad you brought it up, Sean, because it is slavery.
Yeah, no. Again, there's actual instances of actual corporations. I don't want to name any in case I get them wrong, but actual corporations that are paying, instead of going out and hiring people, they're actually paying prisoners to do the same jobs and paying them pennies on the dollar. And people will say, well, but they're getting paid something. First off, they're not. Pennies on the dollar, that is slavery.
The 7 cents an hour is not going to get you rich. Okay.
No, especially while you're in prison.
That's why you're in prison. But you also see judges come along, like the judge in Pennsylvania. He was sentencing juveniles for any minor thing into some correctional facility that was controlled by friends of his. Now he's doing 25 years, but that's too little for him. To have taken thousands of lives, destroyed them over some minute issue. You didn't go to school. You were late. You were tardy. You said something to the teacher. Now I'm going to put you in prison at 13, 14, 15 years old. You put them in a youth camp controlled by your friends. And so it was about money, and that's what creates the process. When the judges are corrupt, as the judge was in this case, as the judges in Los Angeles with us, we get $1 for our civil rights. What rights do I have? I don't have any rights. The pretense of rights is something they talk about. The Constitution is something they talk about. But the actual implementation of the rules that make the Constitution work are subject to judicial avoidance. This judge overrode the United States Supreme Court. If you can do that, there is no judicial system.
No. Well, there's no justice system in this country, and there never has been, sadly. And, you see evidence of this. I mean, it's certainly a two-tier justice system. I mean, if you've got money and you're white, especially, and if you're a white male, right? There's a whole
And
different
again,
justice
you said the
system.
important thing is you got money, you can get away with anything. And you can even black people get away with it. Of course, Wesley Snipes didn't get away with it,
Yeah.
but you were playing with the tax money. We are not going to allow you to play with tax money.
Well, I mean, even people of color that are wealthy are held to a different
True. Very
standard.
true. Very true.
And what is astonishing to me is how blatant this is, and yet is it that it's very
blatant.
disempowering.
If the media doesn't show it, no one knows. If the media doesn't discuss it, no one knows. The fact that you and I discuss, some people will know because you have a show and they will hear it. But the media does not cover a lot of these things. They refuse to cover anything about private prisons because private prisons buy government. Just as you see, when black people had gypsy cabs, they go and use private cars to deliver people in the neighborhood because cabs wouldn't come into minority neighborhoods. Their cars were taken. They were arrested for doing this. But now Uber and Lyft come along. Uber says, hey, we want to use private cars to do exactly what you told other people they couldn't do. And they said, we'll bypass the cities. We'll go to the state. So you see, corruption works. Uber went to the state and bought up the state and said, hey, we can use private cars anywhere in the state we want. No city can stop us. So they had a thing that was denied to minorities for many decades because we couldn't get cabs. So when I had to go to the hospital, my mother, she couldn't take me on a bus. She had to get a private car. But it was an illegal private car. It was a gypsy cab. But you can't take your children to the hospital when they're dying on a bus. So we had to get the rides we could. But when they came to try to be legal, no, you couldn't make them legal until Uber came along and put the millions of dollars, and they sold out the taxi cab companies. You see, taxi cab licenses went from being worth $1 million in New York to 50 grand because the government sold out the taxi people as they sold out the gypsy cabs for the taxi people. The taxi people were paying big money to get these rides, but now they're worthless because Uber controls, and they got it by the government changing the law. They changed the law to benefit specific people. It's not the average person who can put a Lyft car out or an Uber car and get 1,000 people to do it. No, it's a big company who puts up big money, and they did it all over the United States, and they're doing it all over the world, which shows you governments are available for sale. California's
Especially
available.
ours.
They're just corrupt. So we see what can happen when people want to do things and they're willing to buy government, because that's all it is, buying government.
Well, and it's also too, it's a vicious cycle because these same politicians funnel money back into the media through campaign advertising.
Absolutely, there you go. That's
right?
key. That is such an important message.
Of course, the media is going to have a bias. They're not going to risk losing that income, that huge generator.
They're not. That's one of the most important issues people don't understand. Politics puts big time money, especially during an election cycle. Every other commercial is an election. They're putting tens of billions of dollars into local communities, into stations, and they're not going to criticize any candidate who's paying for advertising. And when they do that, they are in fact avoiding their responsibility to protect the public. They're bought off. So when you see people are able to be bought off and paid to avoid what they're supposed to be doing, you see the problems we have in America today. And it's just people are exposing them more because there's a little more media because of the internet and because of social media to some extent. But then again, you have so much on social media, a lot of it gets lost. Because who are you going to listen to? There's 1,000 people telling you 1,000 different things about the same issue. Who are you going to listen
to? Well, and the algorithms too,
Yep. You can't even get to the people who want to tell you what's really going on because the algorithms won't allow you. And there's 50 million channels on YouTube. You know, how many channels are there? You can't find a channel unless you know specifically what you're looking for. Yeah. So I'm glad you told me about the channel that I need to find, because that's what I'll be looking for now. Because I realize
Revolutionary Blackout Network is absolutely astonishing. Great network, great people, and I think that they're somewhere in the 100,000 or more subscribers that they have. Check them out. They're doing incredible work.
Yeah, and they do that, and I've never even heard of them. And I try to follow what's going on. So when that happens, luckily you're able to tell people. Thank you, Sean, because you've told me something new that I didn't know, and I've been following things for decades.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's especially in if you want to call it a progressive space too. There's very, very, I don't want to say the word censored, but I'm going to say it anyhow, because I mean, it really is. Anything that goes against the status quo, you're going to be censored to some degree. And it's hard to even call it censorship because it's not technically the government doing it. It's
No,
private corporations that are doing it.
it's private industry does it. They decide, and again, that algorithm is key, and the people need to understand what you're talking about when you mention algorithm. They will decide what you get to see and hear and what is available for you to be involved with. When you do that, then
Yeah.
in fact, the freedom is lost.
And that algorithm exists in traditional media too. It's not necessarily a technology algorithm, but it's an algorithm of corporates' decisions
Right.
saying we're going to, again, this is the problem anytime that you have the business of journalism is not journalism, it's advertising.
It's advertising. That's where they make their money. They don't care. You don't care what they
Absolutely.
write as long as you can get advertising. And you get advertising by not pissing off the people who advertise with you. And that's a lot of times
Exactly.
politicians, and you see drug companies are pushing all their various drugs these days. And most people
Yep.
don't know what these drugs do. At the end of the day, they tell you every time, well, you could drop dead from using this drug, but don't worry
Yeah,
about that.
it's a side
because
effect.
Your psoriasis. Let's look at the
Yeah.
big picture, and gambling is just overwhelming now. Overwhelming in all sports, and all the various leagues are promoting gambling, which is unheard of. Pete Rose was kicked out of baseball for gambling. Let Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame then, since you're now promoting gambling. What he did couldn't have been so bad if you're doing it now.
Yeah, I mean, and it's, as you said too, it's targeting minors.
Right. They get on that phone, they target them, and you don't know who's on the phone. You got that phone, people are betting mid-game. They're betting 50 bets in a fourth. Yesterday, people were betting 30, 40 bets on the Super Bowl. Whether he'll get a first down, whether he'll throw a pass, whether he'll kick a field goal, whether he'll score in the next drive, whether he'll get tackled, whether he won't get tackled. All these things are now part of it. No more it's just win or lose. It's all the intricacies. How many yards is he going to get? How many yards is he going to get running, passing, this, that? How many kickoffs, All these things are part of the gambling process. And that's why I say it's like drug pushers. Once they get you in, they got you. Once the heroin guy got you to take that first shot, you are an addict. And that's what gambling is doing now. We'll give you $1,000 for putting up a $5. Who do they use? They use black entertainers to promote it. Jamie Foxx, Kevin Hart, numerous people, they're all promoting gambling to the young people, especially to those who have less education, because that's who's going to gamble. Those who have lower education levels, they're going to gamble more as a percentage of their overall disposable income. And so when you see that, you see the danger in that of taking capital out of a community and bringing it over to basically gamblers, the people who were illegal 5 years ago. They'd be in jail for doing this 5 years ago. But now they're all legal and everybody's pushing them. Every major entertainer is pushing them. Every former sports person is pushing them. So if heroin addicts could use sports personalities to push heroin, you'd have 20% of this population on heroin. That's how it works.
Well, and there's also how can you look at the system that we have and not understand the opioid can't speak today the drug use in this country. Of course, when people are desperate, when you take everything away from people, right, you're going to want an escape.
Who's going to want to use drugs more than a poor person living in a dangerous, crime-ridden community? Man, you're trying to get some drugs. You got to get away from this somehow because it's miserable. And that's why the drug. And so what you see on television, they're pushing beer, they're pushing wine. Now they push hard liquor, they're pushing gambling. All these things to make you avoid what you have to deal with. You live in a miserable life. You can't afford to feed your children. You can't get a job. You can't get out of the street because there's crime going through the streets. The policemen, when they see the crime, they jump on you. You're not even in the crime, but you're black, or you're Latin, or you're poor. Poor people get the same way as all minorities get it. They're going to jump on them. So it's a situation where you can't get out of it because you don't control how it's done. And your pretense of voting for the same people year after year is changing it. It's not. You've had the same people in power. As I say, the NAACP is supposed to be a civil rights organization. What civil rights are you promoting if you are not promoting the civil rights issued by the United States Supreme Court? They've never said a single word, not a single word in 20 years about it. So you'd have no standing with me. You're not really a civil rights organization. You're a front for the Democratic Party, and you're doing what's best for them, not what's best for the people. And that's where we have a problem at.
Yeah, and you know, like you said, the only solution that I can see is a third party,
Clearly.
and not one of these offshoots of of one of the current parties, like you see. I
No.
think moving forward is one of them that I just think it's just an extension of the Democratic Party. It's just another scam, if you will. We need an independent third party, and you, how do you get that without the media? You
Well, I
don't.
think you have to develop it, and it's going to come from both sides. But what you want to keep in mind, the third party is not going to be as strong as the Democratic or Republican Party, but they're going to be the fulcrum for politics. If you've got 15 senators, you can control what goes on in the Senate. You will control what can't go on.
Right.
If you've got 5 U.S. senators, you've got 48 on each side. These five will decide this doesn't make sense, this doesn't make sense. Come up with something that we can support, and everyone will find a way to reach what the central people want, and that's what's important. The people who are thinking about what's important to the community, not parties. They are there to balance the extremism of the parties and to bring people who are close to the center of either party into a place where they can feel like they have value. And knowing that value is not necessarily controlling Congress or controlling a government, but to control what goes on there, to be the fulcrum that balances power with the people's choice. And it's you only need 5 to 10% of the people to be in this party to have, and you'll see
Right.
everything change because everyone will come more centrist because now they have to appeal to those who are more centrist, and that's what I see.
Well, and we hear the word centrist brought up a lot too, and that has negative connotations to it. And what I think people understand is that both parties have shifted to the far right.
Yeah, they have.
And there, so when we talk about the center, the goalpost has been moved to these extreme levels, on both sides. And what I also want people to get, they'll say, well, but Republicans will do things, they'll pass laws that are clearly racist, voter ID laws, blah blah blah. Democrats don't do that. What you have to understand
Tell me.
is that it's not just what you do, it's what you do not do. It's the
Right,
inaction.
right.
And that's where the Democratic Party is complicit, in the most, is that they're not fighting back, and they're not really doing anything. They're doing these like piecemeal arrangements that at the end do nothing.
They're talking about a lot of things, but they're
Yeah,
not doing.
talk.
It's like people, I hear people always talking about reparations. Let me just tell you, people, you're not getting any reparations. You're sitting around talking about, I've been hearing for 50, 60 years. Oh, we're going to get reparations next year. My buddy got a card in the mail, his reparations card. He had to laugh. I couldn't help but laugh. But it's not going to happen. And so when you're putting your time and effort saying, oh, we're going to get reparations, and then we're going to have money, and it's not going to happen. You've been talking about that for 60 years, and none of it's ever happened. So let's look realistically at what we can do on a short-term, small basis. Let's start with small steps, with bringing balance back into equity in our judicial system,
Yeah.
with keeping people from being sentenced to major time over minor violations of law, where everybody gets the same treatment. Some people get
Education.
sentenced, you can get a sentence that's 5 years to life. What kind of sentence is that? You can do 5 years or you can do 50 years. But yet you expect people are going to think that's a valid sentence? If you want to give a valid sentence, make it the same for everybody. If you
Right.
rob a bank, you get 10 years. If not, if you go out and steal money out of a candy store, you get 5 years, whatever it is. But if you do it 2 times, you get 10 years. You do it 3 times, you get life, 3-time loser. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But a person comes out and he's 15, 16 years old, and all of a sudden he's caught 25 years about, doing something that you are promoted. You're promoting guns in this country. Every kid's got a gun now. Everywhere you go, a kid's got a gun. But you say it's okay, let's give them more guns. Let's allow them to carry concealed weapons. It's madness. It's madness, and it will destroy this country unless we get some control of the guns. Mass murder goes on every day in the United States now, and no one's talking about it. They talk about specific mass murder, but it's going on in California. There was 4 in the last week. Come on, you can't be realistic about gun control, about some sensible order in the society when you have mass murders going on all the time. And that's
Yep.
what we have. It's going
And
beyond
the
one-on-one.
media is going to. I mean, we just had a shooting last night in
Michigan State.
Michigan
Yeah,
State, and
yeah.
but you're not going to hear as much, if anything, about what's going on in a community like South Central.
You can't. You simply can't because you don't have control of that community. The
Right.
gangs have control, and they carry guns, and they give guns to their friends. They drive around with I'm telling you, I've seen guys carrying machine guns in the front seat of a car in daylight. They're not worried about you. They're not worried about me, that's for sure. But when you see this sort of behavior, the young people look and say, well, he got a gun, I got to get a gun. So now everybody's got a gun. And what did Gil Scott say? Everybody got a pistol, everybody got a gun. And the philosophy seems to be, when you give up yours, I'll give up mine. And we're not seeing that. We're saying they want to expand ownership of guns. They want to expand. There's more guns than people in this country.
Yeah.
It's insane. It's got to be. I'm sorry. It's just insane. If you have more guns than you have people, what sort of sense can that make? How can you expect anything but violence, especially with the video games? They see people in the video games that look just like people. The images are just like real people. You shoot down a couple of hundred at night, where you go out in the afternoon and shoot down a couple of real people. Well, it's kind of a difference, but not much. You lose the sensitivity to the human condition.
Desensitized.
When you lose that, you can't have any sort of justice or any sort of sensibility in what people are doing who have access to high power weapons. It's not 22s. We're talking about military style weapons, multiple machine. And they'd say now, well, you should be able to have a machine gun if you want. What kind of stuff? Are you hunting with a machine gun? You're a bad
I know.
hunter if you need a machine gun. Okay? I don't know what you're hunting, but machine guns don't hunt very much. They're hunting people. That's all a machine gun is used for, to kill people. Just like handguns, they're there to kill people. They're not for hunting. They're not for target practice. They're for killing people. That's the purpose of them. And we have to address the issue and make sure we understand what we're doing in order to improve it. If we don't improve it, how are we going to get better? We can't do it unless we know what the problem is. Thankfully, you're telling them, and your show is showing them what the problems are, and bringing on other people to help you show it. That's important.
Well, and I want to go back to what you said too about that centrist, that center position. Most Americans, if you look at the polls, most Americans want gun reform. It's the political establishment that we're screwed by.
Yeah, because they make it an issue of you don't support the Supreme Court said that. Supreme Court said I was supposed to get a cable television system too. I didn't get one, but you got all the guns you want, right? How's that balance out? That's not even the First Amendment. That's down the list from the First Amendment. So if I can't get my rights, why are your rights valid and mine aren't? If you take somebody's gun, you're going to give them more than $1. So why are their rights more valuable than the rights that go with the First Amendment of the Constitution to the United States? If it is, then we've got a problem. And there we are. We have a problem. And the problem
over and over again, you're told, people of color especially, and people that are poor especially, are told, you don't matter. I mean, you were told, you don't matter. Here's $1. You don't matter. Go away.
Go away. We'll just, we'll give you a little place to go sleep at night. That's fine, but you don't matter. And when people believe they don't matter, they don't think like they matter. They don't take the steps to improve themselves. And when you don't do that, you can't improve yourself if you're not taking a step. People don't want to get education because they say, oh, I'm not going to go to school and do this. But this education is available in many places. You talk about black entertainment television. We don't need more entertainment. This is a ton of entertainment. We need education. We need to know how systems work. We need to know how to improve ourselves. These are the things that will make people improve the society by improving individuals and letting them know there is a chance. That's all I know. You have a chance if you're willing to work and find answers to the questions that perplex our society. And it's not that complex, to be perfectly honest. You don't have to be a genius to figure out. You got 100 million guns in this country. Somebody's going to get shot tonight.
Many people.
And now they say that the Constitution guarantees you the right to have a concealed weapon. There's nowhere in the Constitution that it talks about concealed weapons. That is a specific issue. Concealed weapons is, even the Westerners didn't carry concealed weapons. You can carry it on the outside. When you allow concealed weapons as your standard right, but my right to the First Amendment is nothing, then what happens? People with guns have more rights than those who seek to speak in the First Amendment. So they have more power than I have because they have rights. My rights.
But even with, again, this goes back to this racism. You start giving black people guns, and all of a sudden,
we got to stop. That's
we got to stop it.
The gun laws came in when the Black Panthers started showing guns.
Right.
They said, we got to stop this. We can't have guys walking down the street with rifles in their hands. So they changed the law.
And it was Ronald Reagan
exactly.
that changed it. Yeah.
That was when the Black Panthers started showing guns. They said, we got to stop this. We can't have people walking around the streets with guns. And now you say everybody can have a gun now. So what is the law? The law changes. If the law issued by the Constitution and the law issued by the Supreme Court changes, then in fact you don't have a valid system. When a current Supreme Court overrides the judgments of a prior Supreme Court, then in fact there is no precedence for law. And if there is no precedence for law, then in fact you don't have law. You have
and you don't have a democracy.
Well, no, you can't. You can't.
Yeah.
If the law is not consistent, it cannot be a democracy. And so when you see this and people changing the law every other year, you can have, you have a right to carry a gun. You have a right to carry a concealed weapon. Where it's never mentioned, you have a right to shoot people if they look at you cross-eyed. So this is a situation where you can't solve a problem by creating a bigger problem. And that's what we've created. The whole thing with guns and allowing machine guns and high-powered weapons to be in the public's hands, I don't really have a problem even with that. But you must make it clear that you must have the responsibility that goes with these weapons. So one, machine guns are for military purposes. They are not for people. And you're allowing people to have machine guns. Then you're not serious about stopping crime or stopping gun violence. Because obviously you got a handgun that everybody's got one. Every kid in school's got one. A kid 6 years old walks up and shoots a teacher in the first grade. Where does this come from? I've never even heard of such a thing. Where does he get a gun? What makes him think he can shoot a teacher? What do you do with him? Do you lock him up for the next 50 years of his life? Do you send him to juvenile facility? Obviously, there's a problem. The problem, PTSD is running rampant. As long as PTSD runs rampant, we will have continued violence in communities, especially minority communities, where the violence is shown, and that violence and perpetrated means that people will get the same feeling of PTSD as if a military zone, because it is a war zone. People shooting machine guns out of cars into communities is a war zone. And as long as we have that war zone, we cannot improve that society.
Isn't part of, you mentioned reparations earlier. Isn't that an absolute necessity, reparations? Because so much, part of the problem with these communities of color is the, not just the deprivation of rights and technology, but the fact that there's been such this wealth inequality that's persisted.
Really? It's clear. I don't see reparations. How are you going to decide who gets them? Is it a black guy from Africa, a black guy from Queens? If you came here in a certain year, if you did this, if you did that, it's way too difficult to try to, in fact, you do it effectively. That's what I believe. And I don't believe
people of color have been deprived of something like hundreds of millions of dollars.
Billions of dollars.
Yeah.
But again, when we come back to technology, that was what we were doing with technology. Technology was a redistribution of wealth in America. I explain to black people sometimes that if we had 50,000 more black millionaires, it wouldn't make a blip. It wouldn't be worth 0.1% of the American economy. So it's about education creates knowledge. Knowledge creates jobs. Jobs reduces poverty. Poverty reduction reduces crime. And therefore, you create a system that works with all these things. So it's nice to think that there's going to be reparations. I just don't see it happening. I'm just being real.
I don't either.
I don't see it happening. So I'm not going to bank my money or spend a lot of time talking about reparations when, in fact, I see so many young men, I'm going to get some reparations. San Francisco said we're going to give $5 million. Dude, it's not going to happen. So, that's just just a regular guy. I can have an opinion, but we need to focus on education because education creates jobs. Jobs reduce poverty. Poverty reduction reduces crime. And that's where we want to be. We have to reduce crime to keep poverty down. As long as we have crime, poverty and lack of education will continue to benefit. And so we have to educate the children and make sure they get educated. But we have to provide moral values, not merely moral values they get off the internet. We need to be able to go into our community and say, hey, this is what we believe in this community. That's where I came. I came from a neighborhood. And if I did something wrong 3 blocks from home, they called my parents. And if I came home and said, well, she told a story on me. So Miss Smith told a story about you, called down here, about you doing smoking cigarettes on the corner. Now I'm gonna beat you 2 times, 1 for smoking a cigarette, 2 for lying about Miss Smith. So, and that was in the old days where you got beaten. So you can't slap a kid no more. You can't even look cross-eyed at a kid. But that's a problem in minority communities because you have a single parent family, and sometimes you need to slap that kid. I'm sorry, people gonna say, "Oh, that's me." I'm not talking about beating a kid with a stick. No, sometimes you just slap the kid upside the head, and you see that happen. All of a sudden, the cops are all around. Guys pull guns on you, no cops. You slap your kid. Oh, they got cops in your house. You got to do this. You got to go to all sorts of classes because you slapped the kid. The kid needed to be slapped. That's just part of kids growing up. I got slapped when I was a kid. I got beaten when I was a kid, but never one I didn't deserve, and many that I missed that I did deserve. So it all balanced out for me. But education was
Yeah.
power. My father came from Birmingham, Alabama. He knew about racism. And when we grew up, he didn't spend his time talking about racism. He spent his time talking about education. He said, man, don't worry about what white people think about you. Get your education. And it turned out to be right. My brother was able to graduate high school at the age of 16, be able to become a medical doctor by the time he was 22, because they declared him a genius in the city of New York. You want to have a problem, try coming up with a guy who's really smart when you're going to school and your brother's getting great grades. Teachers looking at you like you're crazy. You don't know that. Your brother knew that. You go home. I got B's. Your brother got A's. And my parents were real good about that. They didn't ever push it. Your brother got A's and you get B's and C's. But education was important, and making sure that you went to school. You could talk about whatever you want to do at night. You're going to school tomorrow. And if you don't go to school, you are in fact not going to be able to watch TV or do anything else in my house, because school was priority. And so if you think you're too sick to go, you're too sick to watch TV. You're too sick to watch the game. Sorry, you were sick all day. So next day you were going to school. You be on one leg, you go to school. But it was important. The power of education showed me how it can change people. That I was able to come up and become a CPA, even though I never heard of a CPA until I was in college. My father didn't have a CPA. He did his own taxes. So all these things that educated me. I had two brothers that were doctors. Now, mind you, my father came from Birmingham and never got out of high school, but never went any farther in high school. He had 4 kids who had doctorate degrees. I was a CPA, and my brother had a good job. So there were 6 of us, and 4 of them had doctorate degrees from a guy who came from Birmingham, Alabama, who was born in 1915 in Birmingham. You know what kind of life he's seen? But he made education important, and he got us to New York out of Birmingham. That was the best thing that ever happened to us, because education was important in New York for all people. And we got a great education, and we're able to use it and go to do different things, to be involved in all sorts of industries and create professions. This was good. My brothers were doctors and worked in hospitals in New York and in Los Angeles. My brother worked in South Central. My other brother worked in Brooklyn in New York. They worked in communities that needed good doctors. And they weren't worried about making a little more money, trying to go to Beverly Hills or go out to the island.
Right.
They wanted to do what was important. They made enough money. That was the thing. They took pride in what they did. Being a doctor, my brother said he's not a physician, he's a doctor. Physicians are who I send you to when you need more help. But I'm a doctor, and that's what I do. I help people. That's what he did. Now I'm proud of him.
And then again, that goes right back to what this whole issue centers around is community. People, instead of people wanting to flee South Central, the idea is you want them to stay, you want them to return and contribute back to that community.
Exactly.
And that's what's being deprived along with, the problem is, and I don't know how we solve it.
Well, I think we have to make sure people understand this is a neighborhood. A lot of people in South Central go generations in a family house, and then and what they say is real estate is the greatest transition from income in America.
Right.
And so you see people coming their parents, they have a house, they live in this house for 40 years. Then you give it to the kids, and the kids do something stupid with it because they haven't been educated about the importance and power of money. So they take a house that's worth $500,000, they sell the house, they go out and buy themselves a $100,000 car, 50 grand worth of things, go out and party and go out. Next thing you know, it's 2 years later and you got 50 grand left. You can't put it into a business. You don't have anything. You've blown $500,000 in 2 years. You look at professional athletes. This guy the other day, I saw Ocho Cinco. He was talking about how he maintained all of his money as a receiver when he was with Cincinnati. He said, I maintain my money by buying fake jewelry. Fake jewelry. And he said, I've got 85% of the money I made when I played football. And I'm so proud of him. I got to tell you, I am proud of him to have the intelligence to realize jewelry is a joke. Most of the people wearing it have no idea what's real and what's fake. They don't. And they don't know if they're buying fake jewelry or not. You're not a jeweler. How are you going to know? You guys get to this guy stole several $1 million worth of jewelry. How much did you invest in the community? How much did you put into the education of your children? How much did you put to value? What Drake, this one guy bet $1 million on a sports event. But how much did you invest in the community? Cannot have it unless you invest. You cannot build affordable housing without people coming in and putting capital. That is what capitalism is. capital makes things happen in America. And unless we address the issue of capital and the waste of capital, drugs, gambling, all these things waste capital. And being involved in the criminal justice system, you can never have capital once you get in there. They're going to eat up your money. If you got money, a good lawyer is going to take it all. If you don't, you're going to go to
Yep.
jail. That's how it works. So capital is key. And people talk about, well, capital is this. We don't like capital. I don't care what you like. This is where we live. Capital is the root word of capitalism. We live in a capitalist democracy. If you think you're going to participate in this society without capital and with misuse of your capital, you're grossly mistaken, because democracy is dependent upon the level of capital that you have. As you said before, those with more money get better treatment in the legal system. And that's just a fact, because you've got private lawyers versus public defenders. Public defenders got 40 cases. So
One viewer is asking, with college being so expensive, how do we get education? And that's a great question.
I think it's an excellent question. I think what's important is we must use the junior college system to get children into the educational system. By using junior, you get them ingrained in getting educated, and the junior college system costs so much less than the four-year schools do. So you can get into a public junior college system for probably a couple of grand a year versus 35, 40 grand a year for a public university like UCLA or USC or one of these. So I think we must, one, make sure that we get a good education coming out of high school so they can transition to junior colleges, because you can afford the junior colleges, and then transition to a four-year college for the last 2 years. You don't need to do 4 years at a four-year college. Some people do because they can afford it or they've got the grades. But you need to learn and get used to getting education at the lower level, junior colleges. It may not be the same education as UCLA, but for basics, you can get the basics at the junior college level. And when you get into your degree, then you go to a four-year school and you get the better teaching at the four-year school for what you're focusing on. That's how you do it. Well, you must.
I wanted to ask you. Sorry to interrupt you. I wanted to ask you because it's very important too. One of the things that you do that I think is absolutely fantastic is affordable housing, and I wanted you to talk a little bit about that, about what you're doing, and because again, I admire you because you don't give up. You're very persistent. I mean, I can imagine how defeated I would feel going through all of what you've gone through, and then just hear a judge just dismiss you with $1. I'd be just like, well, what can I do? You're right. I tried.
Let me tell you something. Shortly after that, I had a brain tumor. And when a guy tells you you've got a brain tumor and you need to be in surgery within the next 7 days, your entire perspective on life changes. It really does. The things that worried me a week before that, these guys mistreated me. I may not get out of this. I'm 7 days away from my death. And when you wake up and you get back into life again, you're like, my brother stayed sick for 10, he had leukemia. We both got leukemia. He got leukemia in the same year I got the brain tumor, right after this whole thing. Now, people may say that stress didn't cause it. I tend to.
Oh, of course it did.
So if I got a brain tumor and he got leukemia, they gave him 1 year to live in 1994. He lived for 15, 16. He said, I want to see my kids grow up. And he got to see his children grow up. So what I said to myself is, I'm going to do something productive. My brother, the next few years was spent taking care of my brother, making sure he was cared for and his family. Now, when that was done, I started moving forward to writing the book, developing affordable housing. So I went and got a license from the Securities and Exchange Commission. I don't do this on my own. I have a federal license that allows me to raise capital, because that's the protection that the people who invest with me get. I have a federal license that allows me to do it. I have the ability to do anything any other major brokerage firm can do. But my focus is on affordable housing and putting together partnerships and LLCs that bring in $2, $3, $5 million at a time to build 4, 8, 10 units. We can't build 100 units at a time. I don't raise 50, 100 million at a time. I want to raise small amounts so people can say, I own 8% of this place. We're housing 4 families. And let me tell you something. When you see 4 families come in and they get new affordable housing they can afford, and you're not trying to maximize the rent on them, they are so thankful. It makes your heart warm to see how much that people feel. It makes you feel good about yourself and about your skills and your education. Because I'm a CPA, I hold an investment banking license. I hold a bunch of licenses. But I'm still, I still like working with people, because nothing makes me feel better than to see a family get into a house or into an apartment where they feel like they're going to be able to stay there while their children are in school without us coming along and saying, we're going to give you a 20% rent increase this year. No, it's not going to happen. We want it to be affordable. The people who come to me and invest money are basically out of the entertainment industry. They come in and they say, okay, I'll put up a couple of $1 million because we can afford it. We make $10 million a year. We make $1 million, $2 million. We'll put up a couple $100,000. When they put that money up, we don't have to go out and try to find people who want to maximize their profits. They're satisfied to get decent profits because they're holding the value of the real estate will increase over any period of time. That's just a fact. Real estate will increase in Los Angeles over a period of time. So these people come and say, we don't need to maximize what we're getting now. We want people to feel good. And when they feel good and people come along and see what they've done, they are so proud. And I am proud of them for putting the money up that make it happen. And these people out of the entertainment industry, a lot of names that you may even know, but they're producers, directors, writers, people who saw on screen. They don't want their names to be known. They don't want me to tell you who they are because they're proud of what they do and they do it for the reason that is necessary to make people happy and provide what we need in a community where people are suffering. The shortage in LA is amazing, 150,000 shortage in housing units. And again, we may put up, 20, 25 units this year, but we're one person. We're one little group. We've got 5, 10 investors in any little partnership that we do. But I'm proud of that because those 4 families will feel like their lives have changed. And that will make my life feel so much better when they feel like their lives have changed and we've done something productive for the community and for people who needed it. But they just need it. And we're proud to do it because my skills, and I can go and do bigger deals and get bigger fees. But what for? What do I do with my money as opposed to the people who say, thank you so much? Yeah. Nothing makes me feel better than when people say, thank you, my children are happy, we're in a safe place, a good place. If something goes wrong, we go fix it. We don't tell them no, we go fix it because that's how we believe it should work. That's how I came up. My parents grew up and they showed me we live in a community. All members of the community must help each other. And when that goes on, you have a neighborhood. Neighborhoods create good people because they all are looking out for each other as opposed to being against each other.
Yeah.
So when you build affordable housing and you put them into a community, the people, you wouldn't even believe it. It makes me smile so much, way more than any more money could do. Because you can only do so much with money. You get a car, you get more clothes, that's fine. But when people come to you and say, you see my children, they're so thankful to have a roof over their head because they've been living in a motel for 2 years. It's an honor. It's an honor and a privilege to be able to do it. And I'm thankful that God has allowed me time and ability to do it. So that's why I get full licensing. I don't fool around with minor licensing. I get full licensing. Securities, anybody wants to look me up, go look at the Securities and Exchange Commission. They'll tell you what I've done my whole life. They can tell you everything, where I went to school and everything else, they can tell you because it's all public record. I don't have any secrets. I didn't go to the Supreme Court with a secret. And I'm not trying to make a secret out of the mistreatment that have affected Black people all over this country with the Democratic Party and Black politicians. And I'm very serious about the Black politicians because I want to make sure people understand. You tell me about racism, you better look at Black on Black racism because that's what has affected me and this community way more than anybody coming in from the outside. So first look in your own door if you want to see where the problem is. Look inside, then you'll see where the problem is. And then you can fix it. But telling people, oh, white people did this, white people did, get out of here. It's BS. Look at the problems that exist in our community. We've got leaders, we've got political figures who are there, but they don't do anything. They do nothing to improve the community. Jobs, they don't care about them. Education, they don't care.
They'll talk a great deal about them.
Yeah, they talk. And talk is cheap. And that's what we see. They're talking about issues that should be resolved by action. And schooling and education can be resolved by action. We have to make sure that children have the availability of going to a safe school and being in a class where they can get educated at. And if they don't get to the point where they're ready to go, no, let's stop sitting kids forward in grades where they can't read from. You got kids coming out of high school. I talk to kids coming out of high school who can read at a 5th, 6th grade level. Yep. They can't function in society with that level of reading and intelligence. But they tell them it's okay. I've got a high school degree. But when you go to get a job, fill out the application. They can barely fill out an application. It's a crime. It's a crime because they're paying these teachers big money. The administrators are the ones who get all the big money. They've got $500,000 administrators at LAUSD. But what are they doing? If the kids aren't educated, you're not doing your job. That's how it works.
Well, they're teaching to the tests too.
Yeah.
That's what they're doing. They're teaching kids how to take tests.
And that's not to educate them and take tests, how to trick them and take tests. You can eliminate these and do this. That's all. There's nothing wrong with that. But you must educate the people to the knowledge that is necessary to pass the test if you want it to be the test to be effective. And cheating to get people to pass is not effective use of school systems, because that's what they're doing. They're allowing people to graduate from schools, claiming they have the ability to read at a 12th grade level, when they can barely read. They can't do math at a 5th grade level. You go into a store and you give a guy $2 for $1.58, something, it'll take him 10 minutes, unless the screen shows him, you give them back 42 cents. They're going 25, 30, 30, no, 20, 20, 35. It's a disgrace. And it's done because people are not paying attention to the details that go with schooling. Basic arithmetic, English, science, math, all these things need to be taught as important.
And just critical thinking skills. I mean, that's what's really decrepit in this country.
That's a key point. Critical thinking skills is a very important point to see that children improve themselves and become valued members of society. Because when you create one job, that one job creates 5 new jobs. So we created 1,000 jobs. We created 5,000 more new jobs. Now we have less poverty, less crime, because there is less poverty. When you have less crime, you get a better educational system. That's what we're trying to do, is take it a step at a time and do it a little bit at a time. We tried it on a big scale and we got burned.
Are there any organizations or politicians out there that are sincere that you know of that?
I can't say them because I really don't know them, but I know that there are people who really believe they can make a difference. Part of the problem is you get into a system that doesn't allow you to express yourself. You get into the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, or you're going to vote for what we tell you to vote for. And when they start to try to do new things, well, they're going to say, oh, well, we're not sure we can support you for the next election. Then they're going to fall in line because they want to get back in, because they keep believing they can do. There are people out there who really want to do good, but they're being blocked by and that's why I think the third party becomes key. These people come over and bring their people with them and say, hey, we're not going to pass laws to give people all the money in the world for welfare or anything. We're not going to pass laws to improve guns. We're going to pass laws that are going to reduce crime and guns in the society. We're going to pass laws that allow people who with a decent education to get decent jobs, as opposed to sending our jobs all around the world. And then when something goes wrong, well, it's a supply chain problem. It's supply chain because you sent our jobs out of the country. We invest in our country, and that's why it becomes a problem. If we don't invest in our own country, we can't improve our own country. And I think a lot of times minorities refuse to invest because they don't feel like they can invest. They don't feel comfortable with how the investment works. They don't know how it works. So and again, when you invest money, you really should know before you invest how it works, whether it's me or anybody else in the world. You have to know what your money's doing, who's got it, and where it goes to. And if you don't do that, then you're playing your game with money. Money is not a game. It's a serious business. And capital and capitalism are serious businesses. And that's what creates the jobs in this country. And that's who funds the politicians. Capital. They need capital to run them commercials you talked about earlier. You got to have the capital to get into politics and to be successful. That's what makes things happen. The ability to have capital and to make it work for you is something that can make dramatic change, even in minority communities. Remember, you're only talking about a small percentage of the community are minorities in the United States. What, 12, 13% of the United States may be black? But if we improve 50,000 jobs in that community, well, that's dramatic change in what we're going through. And it improves all of society. Part of the reason China controls African resources is because black people in the United States were not allowed to go into Africa and do anything with capital. So China controls the resources. The natural resources are the power in this world now. Why China isn't controlled. The United States is not the number one country anymore. China is the power now, because they have gone into Africa and taken the resources that were only available in Africa. But we eliminate. They're black. We don't want to deal with them. They're Africans. We don't want to deal with black people. And so we missed out on the resources that were necessary. So all the zinc and chromium that goes to China to build our computer chips doesn't come to America. So we can't build things here because we don't get the natural resources that are necessary. China goes and sends 1 million people in, and they take the resources. We ignore it, and we are paying the price for ignoring it. All of our major technology products are made outside the country for the most part. And so when they stop making them, we start benefiting. We stop benefiting. And they can do things with these things that we don't know about. We don't know what goes on TikTok. People talk about what happens on TikTok. You don't really know what's behind TikTok. It's a Chinese company. If you think that they're doing something that's going to be against the Communist Party of China, you're grossly mistaken. So we look at these things and we don't address the key issues that we have to address to be realistic about what we're doing. We've got to find out technology. They can change our phones and make it so they know everything we're saying, where we are, what we're doing. They can do it, but we won't know because we get the phones from there and we're not really looking that carefully at them. If they show us a picture and they'll take camera pictures and we can get on the internet, that's all we want to know. But we need to know what really goes on behind these phones and what people are finding out about us. And then now they put things in to protect your privacy to some degree. But at the same time, if you can put the protection to provide it, you can put the overpass for it also. And so we see they're able to overpass things and get information about what we do as a group of people in America. They can see what 50,000 or 50 million people do with these phones, and they'll know what they need to do. And so TikTok became a power, and now people are TikTok influencers. TikTok is a Chinese-controlled company that decides who will influence America. Because algorithms, again, we go back to algorithms, see? And most people don't even understand what algorithms are. But it's a power that decides which you will see and where everything will go. So they shifted to people who'll give you nonsensical things, girls dancing with one leg up, or guys throwing rocks at people. Is that really what I need to know? Is that really going to help my life? I don't think so. I just don't think. And so when I see people people who are poor looking at these things, you need to be looking at getting an education. Education is power in this country. And if I can become successful with education, anybody can, because I didn't come from a place where we had a lot of education. I came from Jamaica, Queens. My father had a high school education. My mother had a high school education. But they pushed education in our minds from the time we were born. Everything I remember. Yeah, you're going to school. I don't care what you say. You don't like your teacher? We don't care. Teacher, you don't have to like the teacher. Go learn something. And we found out, yes, the teacher's being mean because she wants you to learn. She was actually being nice to you. She's teaching you, but you didn't like the way she talked to you when you were doing something stupid. So when you're doing stupid things, people say, hey, stupid. Don't be mad being stupid if you're doing stupid things, okay? Teachers teach you, and we must respect that and get them in a position of educating our children instead of administrators and executives trying to pretend they're educating our children. They're not. It's not happening. And so we need to look at it in a different way. We can't look at civil rights organizations as solving this. Right. NAACP, Urban League has shown us they're not going to do it. Again, like you talked about, the third party can help make that change. It's not to control the government. It's to take back control away from the extremes that have been taking over government over the last 20 years. And when we do that, we'll find everybody. We'll find people who you thought were right. I know people who I thought were right-wing, and they turn out to be more liberal than the liberals did. They were both, they're Republicans, but they turn out to be more. I said, no, that's not fair. That's just not fair. So I'm not going to support something that's not fair. And that's where we are. We should support that which is fair to everybody, not merely giving something to people who don't have anything, but fairness and equity to all people who work, who go out and make they're living mouth to mouth. People are going out and working. They're making enough to get through the day to make it. But when they increase taxes, sales taxes, gas taxes, all these things, they're taxes on poor people. People talk about the tax rate for rich people. Poor people pay a higher percentage of taxes than any rich person does. Because when you go to buy your food, you pay taxes on it. When you go to get a hamburger, you pay taxes on it. You're eating fast food, you're paying taxes on it. They don't realize, but it's there. And these taxes, as a percentage of their overall disposable income, is substantially greater than the taxes paid by a guy paying a 32 or 34% tax bracket. Again, I'm an accountant, so I'm not in favor of raising tax brackets either. So, but I think what we have to do is get control of a government. We have to control military spending. We spend a higher percentage of our income for military spending than any other country in the world. Why is that? Are we protecting the whole world? No, we're not. We're not protecting anybody. We need to minimize what we're spending and reduce the amount we're spending. Obviously, we can't do that in a year or 2 years. We need to look at a long-term thing of reducing the amount being spent and reducing the amount that that goes to things that are non-essential. Yes, we've got to maintain Social Security. We've got to maintain Medicare. People say, well, they cost. We've got to make adjustments to them. Yes, we have to increase the retirement age. We have to reduce some of the people who are going to be eligible for Medicare. Everybody shouldn't be on Medicare. Private insurance is available for many people. But for senior citizens, during the pandemic, Social Security and Medicare saved this country. It was Social Security that fed a bunch of money into the nation because senior citizens were able to get money. Instead of being put on the streets hungry, they had money to pay their rent. money to get food. This was important. And it's important to protect our senior citizens and to protect those who can't protect themselves. Medicare does that. Having access to medical care is a key element in this society. If you can't get good medical care, you can get bad medical care anywhere. But
Yeah.
bad medical care means you're going to have a higher medical bill because you're going to be coming back for the same thing over and over and over. We need to have control. And we do that by reducing the amount we're spending on things that are non-beneficial, like military spending.
Yep.
We have to reduce it, cut it. And if we cut it 3-4%, I'm not saying drop it in half. That's not realistic. Over a period of 10, 20 years, maybe we can cut it by 10, 15%. But over a period of 2 or 3 years, can we get 1 or 2% cut? That amount of money, that's half the economy right there. That amount of money can translate into benefits and allow Social Security to maintain itself and to maintain its strength. But it won't maintain its strength under the current conditions. So when people say we need to change Social Security, they are absolutely right. We need to increase the retirement age and maybe make a slight increase of the contributions, but mainly increasing the retirement age because people live longer. It was one thing when people lived to be 72 and at 65 you got retirement. Now they live to be 98 and you get the same age. Now you can go to 66. We need to move it up another year, year and a half to make it so that it has a better longevity overall. And part of the money coming from the defense saving needs to go into Social Security to shore it up, to build it so it's safe and structurally sound going into the future. Because right now it's not sound. We've got about another 10 years available in Social Security. We've got to do something about it. We must address it now because it's too big an issue to address in 1 year. We can't address it in 1 year. What we have to do is, one, increase the retirement age. People say, well, that's not fair. Not for people who are retiring in 2 years, people retiring in 20 years. That makes the change because they contribute longer and they get into it later. That makes the people who are coming out in the next 5, 10 years have the system available to them with some degree of stability. And that's what we want, stability in a system that covers so many people in this country.
Absolutely. I want to thank you so much for joining us. We're always running out of time on this show, unfortunately, but thank you so much. I want people to read your book. I wish we were unable to extract a book cover.
There's one on Amazon. They're all on Amazon.
But go ahead and pitch your book for me.
The first book I wrote was called Anatomy of a Hustle. It's basically the textbook of how government and institutional racism work in Los Angeles and the United States. The second book is merely explaining why you see the problems that exist in minority communities based upon what the first book said. It was impossible for things to come out any different than they did when you deny people the rights and you refuse to comply with the United States Supreme Court. When you refuse to comply with the Supreme Court, there is no judicial system. Any judge can decide what the law is. That's not how it works. The Supreme Court is the ruler of this land. And when they changed the welfare, when they changed gun laws, when they changed abortion laws, everybody followed them. But they changed the laws of the First Amendment, and cities like the city of Los Angeles refused to comply with them. And I just want to make sure everybody understands, the city of Los Angeles is one of the most racist and corrupt cities in the United States, bar none. Don't tell me about Mississippi. Don't tell me about Arkansas. LA is a racist, and black people are helping promote that racism. So, thank you so much. And I appreciate you. I've listened to some of your other podcasts. They're great. Thank you, and keep it up. I appreciate it. It helps all of us.
Thank you so much.
Understand somebody's making an effort to change it.
Thank you. Well, and hey, thank you for what you do. I mean, the affordable housing, especially. I was almost tearing up when you were talking about the because I understand how important that is. That stability. I mean, when you're talking about education, you can't educate your kids if you don't have a stable environment.
No, you can't. That's the key. You said the key. You can't educate people from an unstable position. It won't work.
Yeah.
And if you do, you're a tremendous parent. You're a tremendous parent. And I see parents who are struggling who still get their kids' education. They're really working hard. But you can't do it in an unstable environment. So that's where we are. And I hope we can improve it. I'm trying to do my little bit to improve it. I know it's not going to change the world, but it'll change the lives of 22 people this year, 22 families. That may be 80 people. So I'm thankful that God has allowed me the time and the effort and the long life to do it. And the people who come and invest their money, it's such a treat to see people who've got money say, I want to put it into helping people. You're still going to make money.
Well, thank them for me, please.
I sure will.
please, because I mean, it again, and even for the kids, right? I mean, never mind the stress on the parents. Kids know that. How do you expect the kids to learn if they don't have a stable home?
They can't.
Exactly.
They can't. And so the stability provides improvement with everything.
Right.
When you improve education, you improve everything. Increased education means reduced poverty. Reduced poverty means reduced crime. Those three all go together. They can't help but go together. That's how it works here.
Well, again, thank you for doing that, and thank you for coming on. This has been so great, and I can't wait to get through your first book. I wish I would have read the first book first.
You'll be better when you read that one.
Oh, no. Thank you so much,
awesome.
Clinton.
Thank you, Sean.
And
I appreciate it.
thank you, everybody at home, and we will see you next Tuesday, and the Pineal Podcast comes up right now. Thank you so much.
Have a good one.
You too.
Thank you for listening to Citizens AM, KCAM Digital Radio, your voice for a better world.